This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Could you defend your worldview if your life depended on it? Watch this.
My name is Charles Cullen. They call me the philosopher killer. Some call me insane. But Aristotle said that no genius has ever existed without a touch of madness. Some say I'm evil, but I say I make my victims face the consequences of their own ideas. What about you? Could you defend your beliefs if your life depended on it?
Cruel Logic, The Philosopher Killer. A brilliant theological thriller novel by Brian James Godawa. Readers are saying the most thrilling novel you will read this year. A page-turner with shocking twists. Get it now at Amazon.com in Kindle paperback and audiobook.
Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Our conversation today is about a brand new novel from a guest who's been a regular on this program since pretty much since we began this program back in 2009. He is best known perhaps as the best-selling author of The Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Apocalypse, Chronicles of the Watchers, also a world-class screenwriter, in fact, award-winning screenwriter, most recently of the film that attracted some attention in the press, My Son Hunter. But now he is dabbling in a new genre, for him anyway, and perhaps a new genre for all of us, called theological thrillers. The new novel, Cruel Logic, The Philosopher Killer. We welcome back to the program, Brian Godawa. Well, Brian, you don't pull any punches in this novel. You're basically taking a sledgehammer to to what passes for academic thought in the West these days. Cruel Logic. What do you hope? Let's put this out there right up front. What do you hope to accomplish with this novel?
Well, that's a good question. I want people to. Well, it's twofold. One is I want to encourage Christians, actually, in a way. I'm not going to pull any punches. I'm not going to try to hide anything. The inspiration for writing the novel came from a Christian apologist. I'll tell you that little story in a minute. But I think one of the biggest problems with Christians as we're interacting with unbelievers, some of the biggest difficult scenarios that people throw up, skepticism, right, is the problem of evil. In fact, that's the most universal issue, is the problem of evil. How can there be a loving God with all this evil / suffering, right? And that's always been, and actually that is a legitimate concern, and I think it probably is one of the biggest concerns that drives me to seek to understand because the nature of evil and the nature of suffering is so profound that as a believer in God, it is an issue that I wrestle with. And so it's actually a dominant theme in a lot of my stories. So I wanted to sort of address that issue in a creative way. I've always loved philosophy and I've always loved apologetics, but I've also been an artist and a storyteller. And I recognize that, a lot of people don't care to read philosophical texts with logical argumentation, and I understand that. And some people are more interested in story, and so I'm kind of that person who combines the two together. And I wanted to give a narrative apologetic in a sense, in that I wanted to embody the Christian sort of answer to the problem of evil, in a most profound and deep way, but not in the way you would think. It's sort of, rather than giving a positive argumentation, I'm doing what I think Aquinas would call the via negativa, the way of the negative. I'm showing what the negative results in to point you to the positive in a sense. So that's one thing, one goal that I have for the novel. But I don't write Christian novels per se. I write as a Christian author, and so I unashamedly, I like to write about faith, God, religion, because I think it's a part of a lot of people's lives. And I think it's missing in a lot of stories. So I like to incorporate that, but I don't seek to proselytize or anything like that. And so the other sort of reason that I wrote it was I've also had I've had a sort of a heart's concern for what is called Christian deconstruction. And that's a common thing going on these days, or Christian deconversion. And what that is, you'll see a lot of celebrities, Christian celebrities, Christian musicians and the like. They go on podcasts, or they start podcasts, and they talk about how they gave up their faith and the process of it. And a lot of times it is rooted in colleges, universities. Now, it's not a new thing, obviously, because, way back when I went to college, which I won't tell you when, a lot of Christians will go to college and they learn secular ideas and they lose their faith. So that's always been there. But the particular sort of most recent notion has been applied specifically to evangelicals. And so it's evangelical deconstruction, right? So there's this sort of, I don't know if I'd call it a movement, but definitely a phenomenon that I think is popular these days and has gotten a lot of attention, at least within the Christian realm. And it's always been on my heart that, I understand the pressure of skepticism, of doubt, of unbelief against the Bible. All my life, I've been a curious person, and I've pursued apologetics and philosophy precisely because when I hear arguments against God, for instance, right, or whatever skeptical arguments, I'm drawn to them. And in all honesty, I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. What's the other side to that? What's the answer to that? What's the issue? I like to hear both sides, and whenever an issue comes up, it's like I want to know more about that. So I've always had that curiosity, and I went through my own personal journey, of re-examining my faith, in a sense, deconstructing, maintaining my faith, but deconstructing maybe the weak version of the faith that I may have had. Reevaluating would probably be a better term. And so I understand that need. I think a lot of Christians go through that in their life. And so I wrote a story where the pitch of the story is basically that there's a serial killer who is a brilliant philosopher. In fact, he used to be a college university professor. And what he does is he captures university professors and he debates them. And the topic of the debate is his moral right to kill them. So he'll say something like, well, if what you say is true about reality, give me one valid reason why I should not kill you and I will let you go. And, he captures various professors, evolutionists, biologists, feminists, gender theorists, all these different kinds of people. And they seek to try to defend morality from within their worldview, and they really can't. And of course, there's more to what this guy is doing than what is on the surface. And that, of course, becomes the twists later on in the story. But that's sort of the basic premise of the serial killer story. But at the same time, he's doing it to universities' professors in a woke university. And the other storyline that sort of I integrate is this journey of a evangelical Christian who goes to becomes a freshman in that college, and he gets exposed. He has a weak faith, a kind of a typical evangelical faith in some ways. Yeah. And because of that, he gets exposed to the wokeness and he gets drawn into it. And it leads him on a journey to the point where he makes some life and death decisions, because in the novel, I cover almost all the things that you may have heard about in the news going on in woke campuses. You've got the students protesting conservatism, professors shouting them down. You've got Antifa, BLM showing up, doing their protests and some riots. So people tearing down statues of Columbus, right? So I've got all those elements and components. I draw them from the news, literally. Almost every event that occurs in the storyline of this woke university, I rooted it in actual events that have occurred. And a lot of it has to do with free speech. So So that's the sort of two storylines, and how do they connect together? Well, the other component of the story is there's a cop and a psychologist tracking the killer, and the psychologist is actually a kind of a Jordan Peterson character, where he is he's pro-Western civilization. He's a psychologist, and he's teaching in the university, and he's defending Western civilization, and he's seeing that as Western civilization declines. And understanding that Western civilization is rooted in both a Judeo-Christian ethos and worldview, but it's also somewhat connected to an Enlightenment worldview. There's a mixture going on there, as any historian might argue. And so I'm trying to capture this moment in time where we are now, where all of Western civilization is crumbling based on the denial of God, and what does that result in? Mm-hmm. One of the taglines of the novel is "Ideas have consequences." So I want to wrestle with these ideas in the university, ideas in our culture, and show, well, what are the consequences if we were to really live these out consistently? Mm-hmm. What would be the consequences? And of course, my argument would be that many of these people don't act consistently with their beliefs. Many atheists, right? They say there is no God, there is no morality. It's just culturally derived, it's socially constructed, and yet they believe, but it's wrong for you Christians to do this or that, and they fill in the blank, right? And it's like, well, wait, if it's wrong for someone to do something, then there is a morality, and where do you get your standard, right? Mm-hmm. And so, in some ways, I think that the argument for the existence, or let's say the problem of evil, in terms of the philosophical discourse, the problem of evil is one of the perennial problems through history, and it's never been solved, so to speak, but everyone argues it. And yet, I would say, from a Christian worldview perspective, it's actually the easiest argument, and it's the most devastating for atheists, not for Christians. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, a lot of that comes out in the novel, but that's what's going on with the novel. So I've got all these cultural things, these philosophical things, sort of interacting with a big clash, and it all rises to a climax at the end of the story. So that long rambling answer of mine to your question of what do I hope to accomplish with this, or what am I wrestling with? And those are the components. It's like it's the deconstructing of evangelical faith, the arguments about God and his existence related to morality, but also the decline of Western civilization, and particularly related to the wokeness that's in our culture today.
I'm about halfway through the novel, and I will probably finish it before this weekend is out, because this has really grabbed me on a number of levels. Number one, high school debate team captain, so I love me a good debate. Secondly, I can relate to the character through whom you depict the story of the loss of one's faith when you get onto a college campus. Okay, you're raised without a strong foundation in apologetics, and so when you're confronted with these rather weak philosophical arguments, you don't have any. Your house is built on sand. You got nothing. Yeah. And there's no roof. So, the walls are crumbling. So you got that going on. I'm in the news every day for the daily news updates for Skywatch TV. So I'm seeing all of this woke stuff that is permeating the culture, the protests, and so forth. And yet, I was even seeing that I'm about your age, so I won't give away your secret. But even all those years ago, when I come home for Christmas break or spring break or whatever, my parents were like, "You sound like you're being brainwashed." Well, now I can look back on it and say, "Yeah, I kind of was." Yeah, and it wasn't anywhere near as bad as it is today. But what's startling, as people will find out when they read Cruel Logic, is that, yes, you are drawing these things right from the headlines, and in some cases even citing exactly where people can go look it up to show that you're not making this stuff up. You're not creating a straw man or a bunch of straw men and then knocking them down. You're actually taking their own words and using them to make this point. So this is really, really startling. This is... And I don't want to, I don't want to go there because I don't want to compare this to something else, because this is really a unique work. And I think for Christians especially, it's going to be eye-opening. Want to make sure that people understand coming in that because you're depicting reality here, the language is not going to be the kind of thing you would get from the old CBA standards, Christian Bookseller Association.
Yeah, I struggled with that for a long time. And because I've always believed, and I've made this argument for all my, my public life as an artist, is that if you do not accurately depict the sin from which your characters are being redeemed, then your redemption does not carry weight.
Right.
Or to put it in reverse, the redemption that you offer in your story is only as profound and powerful as the accuracy with which you depict the sin that they're being redeemed from. Now, does that mean that therefore no holds barred and be pornographic and all that? No. But one of those components, it's not just the violence and the hatred and such, but one of those components is the language. In the university, and I've read these guys, I've watched a lot of videos. The sort of the student protest movement that is within the universities, the wokeness, it is rooted in a deep, vile hatred that is violent. And so their language becomes very violent. And it's an expression of what I would argue is we're ultimately leading toward. And let me give you, case in point. Why, sometimes it's funny, you hear in the culture, but again, it starts in the university. There's a great book, by the way. I just want to throw this out there. A new book that's out too that I recommend called America's Cultural Revolution by Chris Rufo. Yeah. Chris Rufo. And it's a great history of how we got to the wokeness where we are now and what it was rooted in culturally and philosophically. But I think I lost my train of thought there. So I wanted to show that accuracy. And the language is such that there's some F words in there and such. Let's just put it that way, right? So if you're very sensitive in that realm, it may not be for you. And it is a horror story. It's a serial killer story. I don't think I get gory about it. I'm more about the debates than describe. I don't describe the killings or the deaths, just crime scenes and stuff. So kind of like the movie Seven, where you never saw any violence, right. But you did see the crime scenes. And so there's that. I've always argued for that, but I've also been a realist in knowing that, but the more extreme you get, the fewer people can really handle it or want to handle it. And so fewer audience members will be influenced by it, So there's this struggle as an artist to be, how much do you depict for audience and how much do you depict for your conviction of the truth? And it's a balance. It's really a balance because I want people to be able to read it and learn from it. And so I don't want to be grotesque and excessive, like for instance, the movie, the novel American Psycho. It's an old classic, but in a sense, I kind of call my novel Cruel Logic. It's American Psycho in the American University, but in truth, I don't have the descriptions that are in American Psycho. So for those who are concerned about that component, I think I'm glad you brought that up because it is an ongoing struggle and an issue. But I just plead with at least with Christians to just consider the fact that the Bible itself. We've talked about this before, the Bible itself depicts some horrible depravity. Just read Ezekiel 16 and 23. You see if you can read that to your children. You won't be able to. It describes gang rape. It describes, multiple violent sexual encounters. And it's all as a metaphor for the spiritual lostness of Israel, of Judah and Israel, right? And so the Bible itself sometimes does that. Now, it doesn't do it all the time. It doesn't do deep descriptions all the time, but there's some, and that's the balance I was trying to find. And I hope I did find it because, I held back on some of it, and but I did want to capture a little bit of sense of that reality. Yeah,
your villain here is a character named Charles Cullen, Dr. Charles Cullen, and he, as you say, kidnaps professors from a woke university and then basically challenges them to defend their lives, argue their worldview as though their lives depend on it, which is a really interesting concept. Now, I know this is an idea that you've had for quite a while. What's been the germination or the process of from where this was created? Because I've seen your short film, Cruel Logic, years ago. And so how did that turn into this?
Yeah, and another great question. Are you going to play the commercial?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm
great.
going to put it right up front, so people have already seen it by the time they see this. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it took me watching it a couple times, by the way, to notice the blood splatter on Cullen's glasses, which is like,
really?
Cool. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's a pretty good capture of the kind of the way I envisioned him. But anyway, okay, so many years ago, as you know, I've been a screenwriter in Hollywood, and in more recent years, I've been focusing more so on my novels as well as screenplays, but a little bit more on my novels. And I've forever, Cruel Logic had begun as a screenplay many, many years ago, and it won all kinds of screenwriting awards at contests. I got a lot of producers loved it, thought it was real, smart and all this, but I could never get it made as a movie. And it's low budget too, and I think, come on, and I could never get it made as a movie, which doesn't necessarily mean anything. It could mean it's not good. It could mean that it's just a lot of times things are too unique or too sort of different for people to be able to be willing to commit to make a movie. They're afraid of it, right? Mm-hmm. If you're too original, so it could be good, it could be bad. I don't know, but all I know is that I thought it was a great idea and everybody loved it. I just couldn't get it made as a movie. And so now that I've been focusing more on my novel writing, I finally got around to adapting that screenplay to the novel. But in the meantime, in those years when I was trying to get it made, I thought, well, one of the ways I can help sell this idea is if I shoot a short film, which is one scene with a killer and a victim. Again, this isn't about him killing him. It's about the debate, right? So I shot that film called Cruel Logic. And I'm going to give your audience a couple Easter eggs on this show tonight. One of them is you can go see that video if you want at my website. Track it down. It'll be relatively easy to find. But but the killer was the killer and one of the victims is not necessarily how the killer's envisioned now in the current sort of when you see the ad. So just be aware that was in a time when I was getting the best actor I could. I wasn't concerned as much about what they look like. But the point is it was great acting. And you're right. It caused such interest that a lot of Christian apologists loved it. Greg Kokel, who's a quite famous Christian apologist, he made it viral because he started playing and he loved it, and he would show it at all of his, his classes when he's teaching kids and stuff about problem of evil and such. So that kind of got it some attention in that way, but then recently I finally, as you know, as I've been on your show multiple times, my novel career started about 13 years ago with Noah Primeval. Mm-hmm. And as we've talked about forever, and the whole Michael Heiser stuff and the Divine Council, it just changed our lives so dramatically, right, that I had to tell these Bible stories, and that consumed me. And so Cruel Logic has always kind of been on the back burner. It's my baby that I've always wanted to see get made as a movie. It couldn't. So I now wrote his novel, which is interesting because the novel, I think, is actually better than the movie that I wrote. It's much richer. It's much fuller because when I originally wrote it many years ago, there was, although I'm sure the wokeness was going on in campus, it wasn't known. I didn't know much about it, and it wasn't really known in the media, in the news. So I really didn't have that component in the story, right? And so now that's a interesting focus, but it's also the wokeness is its agenda is specifically to destroy Western civilization. It wants to get rid of Western civilization, and specifically Christianity. So what a powerful sort of culmination of the ideas all put together in one story. And so I'm proud of that, and I'm happy to do that. But if I can jump back even further, where the origin of the story actually came from was many years ago, I had listened to this famous apologist whose name is Walter Martin.
Oh, yeah.
And
the original
Walter
Bible
Martin was
answer
a
man.
rascal. Yeah, I love that guy. He would get in there and fight, but he had a good attitude, and he was aggressive, but he was also very jovial, I guess is the way you put it. He's kind of charismatic too. And so he was like in the 60s and 70s. Well, I would listen to his tapes from the 1960s, and he was on the Long John Nebel show. And I'll never forget this, because this was the inspiration that began it all. Was he was describing his frustration that he had talking to a particular atheist, trying to explain to the atheist, look, you believe in morality, but if there's no God, then you have no basis for your morality. And he would go, yes, I do. I believe in morality. And he got frustrated because the atheist could not think about his thinking. He could think about his morality, but he could not think about the foundation of his thinking. He couldn't go back far enough. His mind was brainwashed not to be able to. And so he finally got frustrated, and he just says, okay, look, it's 1940. I'm a German prisoner, German guard in a camp, and you're a Jew, and I'm pointing a gun at you right now. Give me one reason why I shouldn't shoot you. And that, of course, it flushed him, and it made the moral point that he was making, that atheism has no foundation for morality, and it certainly wouldn't appeal to anybody. And so that I never forgot that, and my desire for interesting, entertaining stories, combined with the fact that there are some stories that can embody ideas really powerfully without being preachy and pedantic, right? I've always, sought to avoid that. But here's another component of it too. Because of my love for apologetics and philosophy, that I trafficked in that realm, right? And so I would talk, study and talk with people about Kant and Hume and empiricism and rationalism and the history of philosophy, right? And I realize a lot of people don't care about philosophy. It's just gobbledygook to them or whatever, or
Right,
it's too
right.
technical. And I understand. And I don't look down. Different people like different things. But it was always been an interest to me. So I'm always thinking, it's so fascinating. People are missing out on this fascinating world of philosophy and how it relates to the Christian worldview. And so how can I make it more entertaining and make it, communicate it in a way that is a little bit more consumable than just reading some philosophy book, right? So that's sort of where I'm driven with this whole Cruel Logic is the first in a short series of theological thriller novels that I'm going to write. And they're going to be standalone novels, so they're not necessarily connected to each other, but they're going to wrestle with these deeper issues, unabashedly working with God and philosophy, as well as the moral evil in this world. And so yeah, that's it's the first in a series there.
That's really interesting. As you know, you've done theological thrillers of a sort with the Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Apocalypse, Chronicles of the Watchers. Sharon does the same thing with her Red Wings saga, but that's a little more direct because you're dealing with the supernatural by incorporating these divine characters into the story. Here, you've got philosophy with a theological flavor to it, but your protagonist, Dr. Joseph Callinger, is a lapsed Jew. Father's a rabbi, but he's fallen away from the faith. So he's an atheistic Jew who's trying to defend Western civilization, but he's trying to do it without a theological underpinning. Now you've got So it's you've got a guy there who's trying to defend something, but he doesn't really have the foundation for it, which is really, really interesting way of approaching this. And I'm looking forward to seeing how the story resolves because, I'm only about halfway through.
Okay. So I'll try not to, I don't want to reveal any twists anyway, but yeah. So no, that's a good point. So that character, Joseph Callinger, he's the psychiatrist. And he's not as outrageously unique as you might imagine.
Right.
He's actually based on another sort of common phenomenon these days that I have always been intrigued by. and I don't know what to call it, but it's this sort of not group of people, but sort of a bunch of red-pilled guys or whatever, right, in the culture who are not Christians, but they are defending Western civilization, and they'll even defend Christianity, at least as a mythical concept or underlying, logos sort of thing. And there are many of these guys I love, like for instance Jordan Peterson, right?
Right.
Jordan Peterson is is your character Jordan Peterson? No, Jordan Peterson inspired me to write this character, but it's not Jordan Peterson, right? But also Douglas Murray's another one where he's a atheist, a homosexual who admits that he's like, look, I don't have the personal belief or faith, but I see the value of the Judeo-Christian worldview in maintaining the civilization, the Western civilization that I do believe in. And of course, Jordan's a little further down the road in terms of, where his faith may be in a God. I know that he hasn't always expressed a genuine faith. And so I don't know where he's at personally, but I just know that it's not that they tend to be men who are more into the mythical component of the faith, right? And the how mythological underlyings of society operate. Now, as a Christian, I believe in mythology. I believe that mythology is the sort of the stories that we tell ourselves that embody our values. So we all have a mythology. Now, the Christian mythology happens to be true. Jesus really did raise from the dead. It's not mythical, but it's a mythology. In other words, it's a narrative, or another word is meta-narrative, or another word is worldview. So a worldview is not just a philosophy of the world. A worldview is a narrative of how you understand reality. So the Christian worldview could be thought of, you can think of it in terms of epistemology, which is a theory of knowledge, metaphysics, which is a theory of being, and then ethics, or ethics, which would be a theory of behavior, how you should behave, or morality, right? That's the traditional philosophical categories. But you can also understand worldview in terms of a narrative: creation, fall, redemption, consummation. That's the common narrative motif that all religions and all philosophies have, right? It's just they don't have the same God, but they do have a narrative of what's wrong with the world? What did we used to be like, and what went wrong with it, and how do we fix it, right? And then what's, like utopia, like Marxism has this utopian eschatological future in it, right? So these are ways that I incorporate all this stuff into my storytelling because I love it. And it's just all about trying to understand the world we live in, and, and apply my faith to it as well in a very, in a reasonable, but also a believable way, because you mentioned this earlier with the deconstruction, Christians losing their faith. My character in the novel, classic example is we're not equipping them. A lot of Christians, I think, because quite frankly, I think they're afraid of some of the implications. Christian churches and pastors may be afraid of the implications of some things out there, so they avoid them and they don't teach them. Classic case is the Bart Ehrman phenomenon, right? So in our churches, and my character goes through this as well. In our churches, we teach, inerrancy, and that means the Bible is without error in everything it says, science and this and that. Well, actually, I don't think that's really the biblical definition of inerrancy, but I think it's more of a modernist approach where we see the Bible as some kind of scientifically precise book. And so if it addresses anything, if it refers to anything, it must be absolutely true, rather than understanding its original context and the nature of literature, and how genres of literature operate. So of course, I think I got a little off the topic. What I wanted to get to was more the fact of, in our understanding of inerrancy, there's this sort of magical view of the Bible, as if all the words are magically perfectly true. But what happens is many Christians don't learn anything about textual criticism, meaning what's behind the English versions that we're reading? What are the original texts? And how did they get to where we are today? Because there's a history of transmission of texts, and there's a lot of differences, and a lot of differences in the texts. And they're I think they're satisfactorily resolved, but the problem is, if you don't tell them that, hey, there's problems between interpretations of original, we have multiple texts of Greek texts of the Bible, and we're not sure on every verse. So we have to use our tools of textual criticism to seek to understand what the original text may have actually said. And it's not all perfect. And so maybe some Christians might be hearing me now and might be thinking, is he a liberal? Or it's like, are you saying the Bible isn't the word of God? No, I'm not saying that. But if you're honest with the facts, and you understand the history of the transmission of the original text, you get to college and you basically get the Bart Ehrman crap, and he reveals a lot of facts that the Christians hid from you. So when you hear them and you face it and you find out, well, he's not lying to me about the facts. He has his interpretation is different, but he's not lying about the facts. You feel betrayed because you're like, well, the Bible does have all these problems.
Yeah.
And so that's one component of a faith that's not equipped to face the skepticism. So when they face it, it's shocking, and they feel betrayed and deceived. And it's understandable why they give up the faith, because of this fear of facing unbelief. So, as a lover of apologetics, I have sought all my life to face unbelief. I sometimes will talk to an atheist and I'll say, I know more problems with the Bible than you know, but I still am a believer, right? But of course, I also acknowledge that I'm a finite, contingent, fallible, sinful human being, and so my interpretations are not God, and so therefore I don't skeptically doubt everything except my own skepticism, right? I also skeptically look at my own self, and so I have always sought to acknowledge, that I have unbelief in my life. I mean, I have things that I don't understand or things I struggle with, because faith is a kind of a certainty that I would argue biblically, the Bible does talk about, having a certain, have certainty in your faith, right? But it's not the certainty that we depict it as, or we understand it in modern, post-enlightened scientific certainty, right? It's a certainty that actually includes doubts, because, right? I mean, look at people like Moses, look at people like David, Abraham. They all struggled with doubts, but they were men after God's own heart. They were God's chosen ones, and Abraham was called a man of, he's the father of our faith, and he's literally, like in Romans, it's like his righteousness was by his faith, and yet he struggled believing God was going to give him a child, right? So understanding of faith even as being, it's okay to have doubts, and it's okay to have struggles with those. You don't have to hide them, and you don't have to pretend you don't have them. And it's okay if you don't know the answer. I don't know. These are the things that I think Christians are not taught. And so when they face real strong, unbelief, it rattles them deeply.
Yeah.
And they lose their faith sometimes.
Because the standard answer is, well, you just have to have faith. Which is like being told by your parents, do it because I said so. And that was never a good enough answer for me either, which is why, when I was in my 30s, I finally went back to the Bible. I was confronted at a critical point in my life with the realization that I was a father of a 6-year-old little girl, and I couldn't explain to her. And I don't think this thought came to me independently. I think there was somewhere an angel had been given permission to kind of whack me on the head with a spiritual 2x4. I realized I couldn't explain my worldview to our daughter. Why is what's right, what's wrong is wrong. Okay, well, the Bible's a pretty good moral compass, but what if it's not true? And so that led me into apologetics. And so, yeah, you can acknowledge that there are differences in some manuscripts. I mean, one we were just wrestling with in our Bible study this past Sunday, 2 Samuel 21, as we were talking about the Philistine giants. Hey, the oldest Hebrew texts say Goliath was only 6'9", not 9'9". you mentioned that to somebody. It's like, what? No, heresy. No, I'm sorry. That doesn't invalidate the Bible. It just says, you need to look at the history of transmission and what might have changed and why it might have changed. Does it affect doctrine? Does it affect the eyewitness testimony of those who say they saw the risen Christ? And, that was kind of a key component, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. So this is really interesting to me in that respect as well, because that was something, again, I struggled with about 25 years ago when I realized I've got the responsibility to teach this little human being stuff. And the answer, because I said so, wasn't good enough for me. So how can I do better? And I think this is what people are going to get from cruel logic, because when you put yourself in in these scenes here, and you're seeing like when Cullen is confronting the biologist and saying, okay, morality is just an illusion we create to justify our own survival at the expense of others, and the biologist is like trying to respond to that.
Yeah. Like, and by the way, as you mentioned this earlier, I literally got to the point where, as a novelist, you're writing fiction, and so you're drawing from real life, but you fictionalize and all this. But the arguments that my professors were making, I wanted to give a sense of verisimilitude, meaning so much like reality that now not all of it, but I often would literally have them quote, or I would quote from some famous, atheists or scientists, what they're saying in the world, not just like Darwin said, but like I quote Sam Harris, but he doesn't necessarily say Sam Harris, right? I have some quotes from Richard Dawkins, right, and Carl Sagan, because these are such powerful quotes, and a lot of them are well-known quotes, but people don't think through the consequences of those ideas that they're saying. Just what you said, it's like, well, morality is a fiction, an illusion, but it's a fiction of survival that we use to survive, And so, but if that's true, then is there any moral obligation at all? Well, if you want to survive, well, why if I don't want to survive? What if I don't care about survival?
Yeah.
Or I don't care about you surviving. I'm going to survive if I kill you. So
my genes will survive. I'm just cutting off your genetic stream.
Yeah.
You're getting kicked out of the gene pool.
Yeah. So it's not just evolution, but it's also it hits everything. It hits, it hits sociology. It hits gender theory, feminism. All of these various worldviews are ultimately rooted in basically arbitrary or self-contradictory worldviews. Now, from a Christian apologetic standpoint, as a matter of my personal understanding, is that they ultimately, all atheist or non-Christian worldviews do not have a standard that is a legitimate, objective, obligatory, let's see, what's the word? An objective transcendent standard, which means, if you say to me, it's wrong to lie, what you're actually saying, or let's make it easier. It's wrong to murder, to kill someone. If what you're saying is the behavior you're engaging in is wrong, regardless of what anyone thinks, including you. But if you say in other contexts, well, morality is subjective. It's all something that we could create, whatever, out of our feelings, out of our intuitions, or whatever, or society, you name it. It's all just subjectively derived. Well, if it's subjectively derived, then you can't condemn the person who's murdering because they believe murder's right for them to do it to this person, see? Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, though, what atheists and non-Christians don't realize is none of their worldviews provide a foundation for morality. Now, they think they do, but that's part of my goal, is to try to explain how it actually works out. And really, this is why the problem of evil, and I deal with some of the classic arguments of philosophy, the Euthyphro and is something wrong because the gods say it's wrong, or do the gods say it's wrong because it is wrong? Which means in either case, morality is outside of God, and these kinds of things. And Hume's skepticism about how does it go? If God is either impotent or evil, because if he can stop evil but he doesn't, if he can't stop evil, he's all powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But and if he wants to stop all evil, he's all loving. But there's evil, so therefore he's either impotent or he's cruel. And of course, the Christian doesn't want to believe that kind of God. And it seems like this is a powerful argument, because if you haven't thought through these things, but I deal with all those, I wrestle with those, and I gotta say, one of in my opinion, probably the most powerful narrative apologetic for the problem of evil is in Dostoevsky, the brothers Karamazov, when Ivan's debating with Alyosha, and it's just powerful. So I bring that actually into my story as well.
Read that scene. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think that's powerful because I think it captures the universal grist that should go on if you're a human being at all. Whether you're a Christian or not, you should be really troubled, deeply troubled by evil. But the problem is that the problem of evil that you think is a problem for the Christian actually is not. If you think it through logically, it's not a logical problem at all, because God has a morally sufficient reason for the evil, but we don't know what it is. But just because we don't know what it is doesn't mean there isn't one.
Right. He
doesn't tell us. But for someone to say, well, if I don't know a good reason, there can't be a good reason. Well, that's to make yourself out to be God, which is, self-evidently ludicrous and such. So it's not a logical problem is the point. It's a psychological problem. It's a problem of the will. I don't want to be controlled by some transcendent being. And this is where it gets back to this whole notion of, for morality to be legitimate, a moral argument to be legitimate, it must be both transcendent and objective, which means if it's immanent, meaning if it's just subjective within this world, well, then it's relative, because everyone has different opinions. But if it's transcendent, that means it's outside of us and it impinges upon all of us, and it doesn't matter what each one thinks. But also it's got to be, and that's, so transcendent and objective sort of sum up that notion. Objective means it's not dependent upon the subject, and transcendent means it's not within this world, it's above it, and kind of like a law of logic, right? Mm-hmm. Law of logic is something that, or a natural law, like a law of gravity. The law of gravity is transcendent, but it impinges upon the real world that we live in.
Right.
And so you have to have an understanding of that. And the only worldview that could actually do that is ultimately Trinitarian Christianity. Of course, that requires some discussion, and I'm sure that if there was an atheist here, it would take us a long time to debate through this. And that's fine, but one of my favorite debates was Jordan Peterson and Sam
Harris.
Sam Harris. They had this series of debates on the what was it called? It was like 3-hour debates where they were traveling around, and there would be slightly different debates each time. It was fantastic, and Jordan Peterson he probably did a better job of defending Christianity than any Christians I've seen. And he didn't do it in the typical way that most Christians do defend Christianity. And so that's kind of that's what connects with me. So I try to, embody that as well into my storyline.
The thing that's really ironic about that idea that that skeptics and atheists want to reject a God who would allow evil to exist, because they don't want to be controlled by, a transcendent being. It's the very fact that God created us with free will is the reason for the existence of evil. Sure. Is the only way God could eliminate or would eliminate evil is by eliminating the concept of free will. So by saying, I refuse to be subject to this being who would allow it to happen. Well, okay, the only way it wouldn't happen, this problem of evil, is if you were an automaton, incapable of choosing.
And of course, that's what they accuse Christians. Well, you're saying God's a puppet master. It's like, okay, well,
it's exactly the opposite of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's sort of like, no matter why, because the bottom line, the non-Christian does not want to be obligated to a creator's rules. He wants to rule his own life. And that's the essential Christian truth, biblical truth that we as Christians should actually understand. You know, this is something I often say. One of the things about the woke culture that I actually appreciate is it is a religion. So, and what I mean by that is it is a totalistic meta-narrative that this is why when you hear a woke person, you are amazed at how they can make everything be racist, no matter what you say. If you say something or it's opposite, they can explain to you how it's racist, right? And this is because they are believing in their worldview, and they are interpreting the world through that worldview. And sometimes I wish Christians would be more like that, in a sense, in that we should believe what the Bible says about the sinful nature of humanity. And so often the way we're talking with unbelievers, it's almost like we're accepting them as if they're, honest, nice people who just have intellectual problems with God, and maybe we can help them understand it better and reason their way. You know what I mean? It's sort of like this, well, if I could just give you some good reasons, it'll make sense to you, and then you'll believe. It's like, no. You have to reason with them, but you have to understand that at their heart, they hate God. A sinner does not. Jesus said, "You are for me or against me," right? And if you approach them not the way that they appear on the surface, but the way the Bible says they are in their hearts, you can actually, I think, maybe have more effect on reaching them.
The irony, of course, is that as we're recording this week, news from MSNBC is that the word woke is the new N-word. So just by using the word, so the word itself is now, because it's been weaponized by conservatives and Republicans and so forth.
Yeah.
So,
something you said earlier that when I was talking, I forgot to mention was the language thing, and I was thinking, so we're talking about the violence. I was referring to the fact that there's a real violent hatred in the woke culture, and it's a violent hatred against Christians and Christianity. And you see this when they use, we sometimes wonder, like, why are they using such bizarre, extreme language like "you're Nazis," "you're white supremacists"? It's like, what? Nobody, like, conservatives are white supremacists. What are you even talking about, right? It's like, I've always understood white supremacists are these obscure little few hundred people in the world who believe whites are superior. The white race is superior to other races. It's like, nobody I know, and no conservative believes anything, right? But there's a reason why they're doing that, because it's all about language.
Right.
They believe that there is no knowable, objective reality. By the way, I do deal with some of this in the novel. They believe that some people say that they don't believe that there's a reality, but they do believe some do believe there is a reality, but you can't know it because it's not knowable. Therefore, all we have is basically power plays. And we use language
Your narrative
to maintain power.
Yeah.
And so if they can use the language to recast their political enemies, the conservative, the right, as white supremacists, Nazis, Hitler, sometimes they'll even say, "You're literally Hitler." You're like, how absurd that you keep. That doesn't make any sense. It does in their worldview, you see, because if their language, you cannot say there's an objective reality. So therefore we create reality through our language, or at least we define reality through language. So by using languages of extreme evil or violence against us, that will justify their violent measures against us. And it begins with economic violence, right? Which is canceling, they try to get you to get fired from your job so you can't make money, you can't make a living, right? But ultimately, it's also going to, as we see now with more of the Antifa and the protests are becoming more and more violent, and you now have transgender killers out there killing Christians because why? Because Christians have oppressed
Right.
us. And if you're oppressing us, then that I'm not engaging in violence against you. I'm only engaging in self-defense.
Self-defense, right.
Because they defined Christianity as itself. See, so it's all a game. It's a language game, but there's a reason for it all. Is the insanity that we see is actually the process of them ultimately justifying violence against us.
Yeah, just thinking through in my mind what spirits might be behind this. But yeah, it's almost like word magic, and of course, weaving spells is as old as humanity, or the concept of it.
That's a good point.
This is a book I'm highly recommending, and like I said, I'm only halfway through it. I'm looking forward to seeing how the story plays out, because I will admit that for most of my life, I know you love philosophy. For me, it was always like arguing over how many angels could dance on the head of a pin. Who cares?
Yeah, I know.
Don't care.
I know.
But in this context, when you're seeing how these worldviews are informed by these philosophical ideas and the great philosophers of the past, suddenly it's like, okay, I can see why this would be of interest, especially if you're the guy who's tied to the table with the guy with the paring knife ready to do damage to you if you can't answer his questions. It kind of brings it in a very sharp focus. But from a long-term perspective, looking at the character of the young man who goes off to secular college, preacher's kid, not really prepared, and the trouble that he finds himself getting into because he's not prepared. Again, I can kind of relate to some of that. I understand why. Now, mom and dad were saying, yeah, you were brainwashed at school. Yeah, kind of was. But having been prepared better would have helped. And I think this really makes the case, number one, specifically against some of the arguments. But number two, just the importance of preparing, especially our kids and grandkids, before they go off into that lion's den of modern academia. In other words, Brian, what you are trying to do is make philosophy great again.
Yeah. Well, I figured because I've got that Hollywood background and the philosophical apologetics, I'm like, okay, how can you make philosophy interesting? Well, combine it with a serial killer. Bam, right there. that was my thought. But this brings up another point, another interesting theme that I deal with. I'm going to reveal an Easter egg here. Is obviously we're dealing with the nature of evil and stuff, and another sort of separation between, I would say, Christianity and almost every other non-Christian belief system is our belief that man is inherently evil. Versus humanism and the like, man is inherently good, or certainly not morally evil, maybe selfish but not morally evil, that kind of a thing. And so, because of course selfishness has a survival value, so you can't make it evil, right? So, but no, we believe it's inherently evil, and of course that's the thing that gets us in trouble, because you're telling me my little grandmother's a sweet little lady, doesn't believe in Jesus. She's going to hell because she doesn't believe in Jesus. Well, no, that's actually not the fact, but she's already going to hell. The belief in Jesus is the only thing that can rescue her, but she's already going to hell, But in wrestling, but I don't take this as a sort of a doctrinal catechism. I actually do wrestle in the novel, but in my own life, I'm regularly wrestling with this. Wow, are we really that evil? And what would have to be the case if that was true, or if we weren't, what would that be? And so in the story, one of the ways I sort of embody that is all the characters in the novel, all the fictional characters in the novel are names of actual serial killers in history. Except for one person. Mm-hmm. And that is Cornelius Van Til, who is the detective who is hunting down the killer. And the reason for that was sort of, it's just a sort of I just thought it was an interesting thing to do, because that's what we artists like to do. But that's sort of, for me, it sort of expresses the fact that, what does it mean when a Christian says we all have evil nature? Well, it's like we're all serial killers in a sense. Mm-hmm. I mean, at least that's what helps us before the perfect, holy, righteous God of the universe, we are all as serial killers. That's essentially the truth of it. Now, obviously, within the human realm and on earth, no, that's not the case. But before the righteous, holy God, and that was my way of expressing it. Well, why isn't the one guy? Why doesn't that one guy have it? Well, that's because Cornelius Van Til is actually the name of a famous Christian apologist who has dramatically influenced my life and a lot of the apologetics that I do. And he's the one that has sort of opened his writings and thinking has helped shape the theology that I'm actually dealing with in the novel. And then there's one other component of that I know your wife will appreciate. And then I decided to make all the names of the buildings on campus are the names of possible suspects of Jack the Ripper.
Ah, okay. All right.
Now, just so you know, I didn't pick names to make a point, or I just picked names that would work the best with, you know, with the story, you know. And same thing with the serial killers. I didn't name someone Gary Dahmer for obvious reasons, right? But you get like an encyclopedia of serial killers. There's like thousands of them, right, from all over the world. And I just got all these names, and I picked the names that would fit the best with the characters. Yeah, not making any specific connection to anything, you know. And same thing with the Jack the Ripper, you know. So
if you're going to use a character generator, which I know authors often do, go to the online character generator, and this is at least a unique way of doing it, and led to some very interesting. Reading, which is why it's taking me a little longer to go through the book, because you did share the story, the Easter egg about the naming of the characters, which I will say this has not taken me out of the story at all. I think there's one of the victims, Arthur Shawcross. His name I did remember from a documentary that I watched. There is a rather well-known series of Christian fiction best-selling, people would know it if I said it, that I won't, but I won't, that I was taken out of the story because of a naming convention used by the author where he was choosing the names of Major League Baseball players from the 60s and 70s. And I was like, he played first base for the Mets in 1969. So,
you knew that.
Yeah. And so that, and this guy, okay. Yeah. That I found that to be distracting. So
yeah, I didn't want to be obvious. And I tried to make, I figured
people
who really are familiar with serial killers would maybe recognize some. And I probably, the Christian apologist in me wants to explain everything. So I probably should never have said anything and just let it like come out, let people start to uncover it. But like, I just love to give away the secrets, but I'm not going to give away the twists.
Well,
you gotta
good.
read the novel.
I am looking forward to it. The novel is Cruel Logic. Links in the show notes as to where you can get it. And Brian Godawa, God bless you for tackling this. This is the kind of thing that when, or if we should say, social media, liberal social media, progressive social media gets hold of this, you could really be in for some flame wars here. Yeah, but we'll pray that. I mean, well, hey, you got away with writing, My Son Hunter, so maybe this one keep you under the radar. Highly recommend. Brian, thanks very much.
Thanks for having me on, Derek.
Check the links in the show notes below this video or audio, wherever you are watching or listening. If you're checking this out on YouTube, of course, we ask you to subscribe, share, and then download our free app. Tell you more about that in just a minute. But we will also include in the notes, not only where you can get the book Cruel Logic, but a link to the short film that Brian put out there some years ago. It's still available on Vimeo, 7-minute short version of the screenplay that he was trying to sell. This goes back to 2007. So again, if you're interested in seeing that, I will link that in the show notes below as well. Coming up, sanctuary cities are saying, Biden, save us! Biden, save us! Yeah, bless their pointy little heads. That and an update on Build Barn Better straight ahead on A View from the Bunker. Everyone learns differently, and that's why we write fiction.
It is. I find that some people love to read nonfiction, but there's something about fiction that psychologists say breaks that fourth wall. You no longer doubt what you're reading. You get so engrossed in the story that you learn. You can learn propaganda or you can learn God's truth.
Absolutely. So, yes, we write nonfiction books, but we are also using the gift of storytelling to try to teach spiritual warfare and spiritual truths. And during the months of August and September, we're offering all 10 of our novels at 20% off.
All 10 at 20% off? That's crazy.
That's right.
That is really, really a good deal. And now's the time if you want to buy gifts for birthdays or Christmas or whatever gift-giving season it is. It could even be Mother's Day next year. This is the time to save 20% on all of our fiction. And Derek's fiction is really, really good if you've never read it.
And Sharon's Red Wing Saga, 8 novels so far. She's hard at work on number 9. If you want to get engrossed in characters who are really grappling with the supernatural and trying to make sense of that world while teaching the divine counsel concepts that we try to communicate here, get involved in the Red Wing Saga. Again, all 8 of those novels, plus my 2 novels, The God Conspiracy and Iron Dragons, 20% off now only at our online store. That's gilberthouse.org/store. It's an exciting day. Here's the Build Barn Better project has achieved another, milestone. The insulation is now in, which not only means the building is now going to retain heat and air conditioning, but it also affects the audio in here as well. The open cell spray foam has cut down on the echoes in the room, which is kind of a side benefit. That's not why we did it. We just want to make this so that we can use it in all kinds of weather. But anyway, this is completed. The team from Lucas Spray Foam Insulation took care of that this morning. And again, it's all because of your generosity that this is even possible. We are one step closer toward moving our workspaces out here into the barn as we continue to build barn better. So that's where things stand in the barn right now. It is insulated as of this week. Sharon and I took some time this long Labor Day weekend to go to a couple of home centers and secure ceiling fans to move air around inside that space. Obviously, with that very high ceiling in there, you get a lot of heat toward the peak. And so to make the mini split, the HVAC system more efficient, we're going to get some ceiling fans in there. Those will go in probably over this weekend yet. And then the next step will be getting the mini split, actually HVAC out there. There will be an insulated door that will take the place of the existing 9x12 garage door that is there. We think that's worth the expense because essentially that's going to become a wall. And having a wall insulated on that side of the building is going to be a real help in making that space usable all year round. So again, thank you for your generosity in making this project possible. And you can find out more at our website, gilberthouse.org/donate. Thank you for watching or listening. And you'll find us online, of course, at VFTB.net, our YouTube channel, youtube.com/gilberthouse. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you. Our YouTube channel has really grown beyond anything we would have expected. Thanks to guests like Timothy Alberino. I mean, let's be honest here. Let's give credit where it's due. It's not because you're watching for me. It's guys like him. But if you are watching on YouTube, be advised that it is their playground. And at some point, I will probably say something that may get us another strike. And that's happened a couple of times now. In fact, they've gone back into our history and found things that they didn't like just so they could give us strikes. So please take a moment and download our app to your smartphone or tablet. It is available. It is free, by the way, available for iOS, Android, Amazon Kindle Fire phones and tablets. We also have versions available for Roku and Apple TV. So if you just want to put this on the big screen, that's great. The mobile app has the advantage of multiple Bible translations, audio Bibles. It's got a messaging area. It's almost like a self-contained social media site. So if you want to exchange messages, prayer requests with other like-minded Christians, well, you can do that through the Gilbert House app. And you can find the link at the website, VFTB.net. Also, gilberthouse.org/app, probably the best place to go. That is our global hub for everything that we do online. And you will get that there. Well, what is going on in Chicago, my old hometown? I say this with no joy. I am still and probably will be until the day I die, a fan of the Cubs, Bulls, Bears, to a lesser degree, the White Sox and Blackhawks. And the White Sox, nothing against the White Sox. I was just born and raised on the north side, so it's, just a geographic thing. Had I been raised on the south side, I'm sure I would have been, as big a White Sox fan as I am a Cubs fan. It's just a thing. They do a blood test when you're born in Chicago, and that's kind of how they sort you out, I think. Anyway, when I was a kid in Chicago, and we moved out in 1977, freshman year of high school for me, I'd started at Lane Tech on the north side. We wound up moving well out to the land beyond O'Hare to McHenry County, city of McHenry, in fact, and went to high school there. When we left Chicago, things were beginning to change in the mid-'70s. But throughout my childhood, it was a safe place. It was pretty much a blue-collar neighborhood. We would ride our bikes for miles in each direction. As long as we were home by dark, it was fine. That is not the case in our old neighborhood anymore. There is a website out there that tracks shootings in Chicago, and sadly, my old neighborhood is one of the, if not the most dangerous in the city. And sadly, the people in Chicago are finally beginning to realize the consequences of voting for politicians who promise free stuff. Administration after administration. Democrats have been in charge of the city of Chicago, which means pretty much Cook County, which means more or less the rest of the state of Illinois, since the 1920s. I mean, there have been Republican governors here and there, and every now and then a Republican senator. There are downstate counties where Democrats really don't even bother putting candidates up. But for the most part, just because of population density, Chicago controls what happens in Springfield, in the state capital. And having lived for several years downstate in Coles County, Charleston, began to see from the perspective of people who are lifelong Southern Illinoisans why there is such resentment downstate for Chicago. But even the people of Chicago now are beginning to resent the government that they keep voting for time and time again. For example, in the 2020 presidential election, Cook County, of which Chicago is a subset, 74% of the vote went to President Biden. Well, Chicago has been declaring itself a sanctuary city since at least 1985, which means that city government refuses to enforce national immigration laws and often will try to actively interfere with enforcement, interfere with federal agencies like ICE when they try to detain illegal immigrants. This has been going on all over the country. We see it in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, other cities as well. But the people in Chicago are really beginning to see the consequences of these actions. And over the past couple of weeks, there have been a number of demonstrations, people in the city really angry at the city government and what they've been doing. In fact, this even began before the former mayor, Lori Lightfoot, had turned things over to the current mayor. Former Mayor Lightfoot attacked Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who's been sending busloads of migrants into cities like Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., calling it inhumane and dangerous, despite the fact that these migrants are signing waivers saying, yes, we want to go to this place. So the sanctuary cities like Chicago, New York, where Mayor Eric Adams, and Los Angeles are now saying, please stop sending them here. It's not fair. And then they're turning to the White House and begging President Biden and his administration for some help. But ideas have consequences, as we just heard for the past hour. And these are the consequences of the border, or the lack of border enforcement. The New York Post just reported this past week that in Arizona, 114 floodgates, literal floodgates in the border wall between Arizona and Mexico, which are normally opened during the monsoon season, because you get these gullies that fill up with water, flash floods that run through these normally dry riverbeds. The floodgates are opened to allow debris to go through without slamming up against the wall and weakening the integrity of the border fence. Also to allow an endangered species of antelope apparently to migrate back and forth. But anyway, this year, even though weather forecasters told Customs and Border Protection that the monsoon season was late, the gates were opened early, which allowed 2 months of just free access to Arizona. Now, the cartels who control the border between Mexico and the United States aren't stupid. They're keeping an eye on things when they see these gates open and realize that Customs and Border Protection really aren't doing anything. People cross the border, they actually turn themselves over to Customs and Border Protection and say, we're migrants, we're seeking asylum. Okay, here's your piece of paper with your court date 3 years in the future or whatever. Of course, most of them never show up. They just disappear into the country, which is apparently part of the plan, because even after the monsoon season ended and the agents on the ground tried closing the floodgates, they were ordered by their superiors and by the U.S. Forest Service to open the gates again, or Fish and Wildlife. Anyway, some other agency that you wouldn't think had anything to do with, stopping people walking across the border illegally. And the gates were welded open. They were literally welded open so that they cannot be closed. And according to the New York Post, an average of 1,400 migrants crossing the border per day from places as far away as China. And contrary to those who are crossing at border checkpoints in Texas, coming from South America, looking bedraggled, like they've had a rough go, the people who are reportedly walking across the border into Arizona look like people on vacation. They're driven up to the border in buses, let out on the Mexican side of the border. They walk through the gates, turn themselves in, and they're let go. And so, at least in Texas, to a lesser degree in Florida, the governors of those states have been sending migrants to sanctuary cities, New York, Chicago, L.A., San Francisco, and so on. And Republican voters have been saying, yeah, let's own the libs. All right, you own the libs. But at the end of the day, those people are still in the country. And in Chicago, you've got people who are basically sleeping on the floors of police precincts because they got nowhere else to go. Police are literally having to step across sleeping migrants on the floor of the precinct when they report for duty at night. And the people in neighborhoods like Woodlawn and Hyde Park in Chicago are now protesting because they're finding that these people really aren't good neighbors. And they want it to end. New York City, Washington, D.C., similar results. Border towns have been dealing with millions of migrants per year, 2.79 million reportedly in 2022 alone. All it takes is 10 or 15,000 to send New York, D.C., Chicago into a panic. And the citizens there, U.S. citizens, finally standing up and saying to their government, no more. So, to those who have promoted and enforced these policies that have driven the residents, the citizens of these sanctuary cities, in desperation to stand up and say, we are done with this, no more, to their elected officials who brought this down on them, bless your pointy little heads. Got a couple of things coming up we're going to tell you about. We're going to be in North Dakota. I am going to be in North Dakota, actually. Sharon is going to take that weekend, a long weekend for her, to do some writing. Again, without me, in the next room, distracting her. This is really a wonderful opportunity for me. My mother's from North Dakota, and I've not been in North Dakota for 45 years, so looking forward to this. It's the Pitchfork and Hoe Gathering in Valley City, North Dakota. Valley City is between Jamestown and Fargo on I-90, and we'll be there October 27th and 28th. I'll be speaking both nights, talking about giants in the Bible and demons, devils, and dragons. Seeing as how we're coming up on Halloween shortly after this gathering. The Pitchfork and Hoe Gathering is an an event that brings together small farmers, some best practices, demonstrations, workshops, live music, some bluegrass and so forth. And then I will be speaking on Friday night and on Saturday night. So looking forward to this opportunity. It's at the Eagles Club in Valley City, October 27th and 28th. There's more information at our website, gilberthouse.org. And also you can find more at the Pitchfork and Hoe Gathering page at Facebook. Skywatch TV has a virtual conference coming in October. I don't have firm details on that yet, but this virtual conference will feature a presentation from yours truly, along with Tom Horn and many of the usual suspects. So as soon as we get more information on that, I will let you know. And, of course, our tour of Israel coming next spring, March 31st through April 9th, with special guest Timothy Alberino. Don't miss this opportunity to see the Holy Land with Tim. We will take you to megalithic sites on the tours that most tours of Israel do not visit, like Gilgal Rephaim. And we are planning for this to take you to the dolmen on the Golan Heights, ancient Bashan, with the 50-ton capstone, the Shamir dolmen, just discovered about 10 years ago. The only one, I think one of two now, that's known north of Yemen that has petroglyphs on the inside. Literally a 50-ton capstone. That's like more than two fully loaded 18-wheelers on an American highway. How did they get that into place 5,000 years ago? Don't know, but we'll take you there. And, of course, all the other places that you will want to see, like the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, Jerusalem, the Old City, the Temple Mount, and more. You can find out more online at our website, gilbertsinisrael.com, gilbertsinisrael.com. That takes you directly to the Lipkin Tours website, where you can find out more and reserve your place. So, again, thank you for taking time of your schedule to watch or listen, wherever that may be, whether YouTube or our app, or if it's one of the usual podcast sites. We appreciate if you take a moment to give us a review, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Our announcer is the inimitable D.C. Good. And A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. I've got that memorized now. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.